William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest writer of all time, is the iconic William Shakespeare. Now I know that's quite a reverence considering the diversity and the richness of writers we have out there. But when you observe Shakespeare's feats, artistic feats, and the breadth of his artistic feats, it's um, I without hesitation I can comfortably say he's easily amongst one of the greatest historic writers of all time, so to speak. Right. Well, allow me to point out that in the richness of Shakespeare's writing, it's usually in consideration of the richness of Shakespeare's writing, it's usually considered when you observe an artistic artifact, a literary piece or a film or even a, a sculpture or an art piece, and you talk to the writer or you talk to the filmmaker or you talk to the artist, and you ask them what their inspiration was, or where um, the impact, right, the influence, the flame for the creation of such a character came. Where did it come from? Most of them will attribute their own personal lives to the creation of a particular character. The authors will, or the artists, or the filmmakers will say, "It's what I know best." So, um, I'm attributing this character with some of my characteristics. Now, um, Shakespeare, if we conclude that, if we make the conclusion that Shakespeare also did that, you'd have to say that this is an individual that is incredibly and almost supernaturally incredibly multicolored, right? Because the why is that? Because if you observe the diversity of characters across, um, you know, um, his canon, right? And we create a little Shakespeare library, and we say, oh, what are the similarities between Macbeth and Hamlet, or Othello and King Lear, right? Anyways, you take this comparative overview of all these characters, you'd have to say that how incredibly diverse these characters are, and if Shakespeare is indeed exemplifying himself through them, then he's got this multiplicity of alter egos out there, right? Well, what I'm going to do with this presentation is, we're in essence going to avoid that, right? We're not going to dig Shakespeare's biography, and in fact, they say, there's it's hard to really get to know Shakespeare. There's not much known about him other than by the means of his writing of his plays, right? Um, so we're going to avoid that by undertaking a formalist critical approach towards analyzing William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Now, more specifically, I'm going to apply a formalist approach to truth conceptions in Shakespeare's Hamlet. So let's talk briefly about a formalist approach. A formalist critical approach to a literary piece, what it does is it attempts to credit and interpret the work within itself. That is, I'm not going to come to a conclusion, a critical conclusion, by observing the author's biography or maybe psychoanalytic status. I'm not going to look at a historical overview or political conditions of the time. I'm not going to look at, any societal or ecological or, whatever it is that we might externally bring to a work. All of that is dismissed in a formalist approach. Instead, we're going to solely look at the work and try to manifest conclusions within the work itself. Right? Now, truth conceptions. What do I mean by truth conceptions? Well, one of the beautiful things of Hamlet is here's a character that even in his, um, um, tragic encounters, right, in his, or his, almost like a tragic hero, almost in his, futile attempts to get to know something, he sincerely tries to get to the truth. And some of the truths he tries to get at, he does it directly, right? He attempts to achieve to these truths directly. And other truths, they seem to come as a byproduct of Hamlet's attempt to surface these truths throughout the play. So let's begin and let's go through it, and hopefully I can clarify both the formalist approach and this understanding of truth conceptions in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Well, the first truth conception, theme of metaphysics and the nature of being, it addresses Shakespeare's, Hamlet's father, right? Now, at the beginning of the play, you have a couple of characters. You have Horatio, Bernardo, Marcellus, and a ghost appears to them, right? This ghostly entity appears to them, and they can't believe it. They can't believe how very much like the former king this ghost looks like. Well, anyways, Horatio comes to the conclusion that he's going to notify Hamlet because it just severely looks too much like his father, and that maybe there's a strongly connected relationship between the ghost and Hamlet himself. So Horatio goes and talks to Hamlet, and he says, "Look, I saw a ghost, and he very much looked like your father. Would you like to join us the night watch so you can verify?" And Hamlet, of course, he's in he's in a gloomy state because his mother has just married his father's brother, Uncle Claudius, so to speak, right? We'll bring up that issue a little bit later, but with regards to the ghosts, Hamlet, without hesitation, agrees. And he gets out there, and as they wait the night, sure enough, who appears? The ghost of Hamlet's father. In a conversation, first and foremost, the ghost is kind of walking away, and it kind of infers to Hamlet that it would like for him to follow him. Horatio, of course, they're very doubtful. Horatio and the other night watchers they're relatively they're extremely hesitant, and they're uncertain about this entity. And Hamlet, even threatens them, says, "Let me go, or I won't be responsible for any harms that happen to you." So they give in. Hamlet goes out. And he has a conversation with this ghostly figure. It turns out this ghostly figure, confesses the testimony to Hamlet that he's been murdered by none other than Claudius himself, his own brother. So the ghost informs Hamlet of this, and also demands of Hamlet that he murder Claudius. He says, I want justice, and I think you want justice, and the best way to apply justice is for you to do as I say, and I'd like for you to kill Claudius. Hamlet does seem to do a little bit of pondering, but ultimately comes to the agreement, and he swears it, right? And the ghost demands that he swears that he, in fact, commit to this act of murdering Claudius. And in the process, a couple of questions, immediately surface. So if it's a spirit, right? When we conceive of a spirit, and it's a spirit in the afterlife, you know, it makes sense to ask: is this indeed a good spirit who is indeed seeking an act of justice? Or is this a spirit who's maybe not so good, right? Maybe is indeed an evil spirit, and whose quest and goal is to maybe corrupt Hamlet's soul. And how is he going to corrupt it? Well, by having him tarnish it by committing the act of murder. And it's not an everyday thing somebody can just randomly commit an act of murder, right? So metaphysically, understanding the nature of being of this entity, of the ghost, what is the truth of the ghost? And Hamlet himself comes to a point in the story where he asks, is this indeed is this spiritual entity someone or something, the spiritual entity, something that has a good interest in mind, or is it deceptive and seeking very much to corrupt Hamlet, right? Uh, us as readers, right? We can't. If we're applying a formalist account of this, we want to try to understand the elements of the text that help frame a possible truth to, or what this ghostly entity precisely is. Now, what makes it interesting is that Hamlet himself is already undergoing a little bit of trauma because of the death of his father and his mother's sighting and marrying of, Uncle Claudius. So it sets up for a very interesting scenario in which we're strongly analyzing Hamlet's state of being. What descriptors do we have in the text that give us a sense of his state of being? Is Hamlet okay? Is he hallucinating? Is this but a mental perception that he's creating? But then, how do we explain Horatio and Marcellus and Bernardo witnessing the ghost itself, themselves as well, right? So it's not just this random entity, right? So this is some of the considerations in addressing this subject of the metaphysics and the nature of being. Now, the second subject, conceptions of love, are also interesting. Now, here's an interesting question. The concept of love. What is it? Is it something that's objective? Is it something that's subjective? Is it an idealism of sorts? Does it truly exist, or is it but an invented conception? Well, let's observe some of the considerations within the text that bring about truth conceptions of love. So, for example, first and foremost is Ophelia, who at the beginning of the play, or at least towards the beginning of the play, is having a conversation with her brother Laertes, and it seems like she's very much lost in Hamlet, right? And she's very much enthralled by Hamlet, and she confesses to Laertes, that they've got these passionate um, love interlaces, right, between her and Hamlet, so to speak. And Laertes does provide an alarm, and he says, "Well, Ophelia, be careful, right? Do we know the intentions of Prince Hamlet, so to speak? Well, anyways, Ophelia thinks nothing of it, and she's apparently madly in quote unquote love with Hamlet. Polonius comes in, right, amidst the conversation between Ophelia and Laertes. Polonius being Ophelia's father. He comes in and he advises, of course, Laertes, who's going to France. It advises him on how to behave amidst the context of France. And then once he walks away a little bit, he approaches Ophelia and asks what her and her brother were talking about. And Ophelia says, "Oh, father, it was simply having a conversation about my relationship, my interactions with Hamlet." Polonius, of course, grows even more severely cautious and worried about Ophelia than Laertes, and he says, "Look, you're a woman. He's the prince. In a way, he can have whomever he desires. He's got this position of hierarchy, royal hierarchy. Daughter, kind of, who are you to have a side to be by the side of a prince, right? Take care of yourself. I do not want you to expose yourself to Prince Hamlet, so to speak, right? I demand it." Now, Ophelia, if she is sincere in her love of Hamlet, and she's certain of her love for Hamlet, even if she's being a good daughter, knowing what it's going to cost her, the love of, let's just say, love of her life, right, Hamlet, wouldn't she be a little bit more stubborn and disobey her father? Says, "Oh, okay, father, but behind your back, hey, right?" Well, no, she says, very assertively, she says, "I shall obey. I will obey." Right? So, I mean, that's an interesting question. What is the truth of Ophelia's love for Hamlet? Right? We can flip it a little bit. Is Hamlet too in love with Ophelia? I mean, it seems like it, and it's not until Ophelia kind of rejects him as per her father, and Hamlet kind of gets emotional, and addresses a series of issues towards Ophelia. And ultimately, there's that famous line tells Ophelia, "Get thee to a nunnery," right? So it brings up questions of this love issue. Is love but lust? Possibly, right? The other conception of love is with regards to Gertrude, and this is Hamlet's mother. Now, she's an interesting character because we're not certain as to her intentions. We're not certain as to her acts, so to speak. And Gertrude, what gives Hamlet a lot of caution is he can't bring himself to believe how Gertrude could marry Claudius. First and foremost, how Gertrude can come to marry Claudius, right? An incestual act, maybe not directly, but certainly along those lines, right? After all, Hamlet is the former king's son, and so Hamlet comes to say and ask, it's been about 2 months, and gosh, mother, you're already over father. Did you in fact love him? Did you have questionable intentions in my father's passing, so to speak? So along those lines, right? Along those lines, I mean, this is This is what's occurring um, um, with regards to you know, questions that we can bring up are Ophelia's love of Hamlet, Gertrude's love of Hamlet, Gertrude's love of the former king, right? Um, or is there sincerity in Gertrude's love for Claudius? Is there a is there a is everything okay with Ophelia, who, yeah, I have to obey father because, I've got to be that illustrious daughter. I have to make him proud, so to speak, right? So these are some of the issues to consider, some of the questions that arise in attempting to define this truth conception of love. Now, there might be no truth, right? I mean, I think the beauty of Shakespeare's literature is, he surfaces these questions and he maintains that exploration of knowing constant. There might not be an answer, right? At least within the text. So the next issue is an issue of identity, right? It might be a conception of identity. Well, this one's tricky. This one's tricky because it certainly involves, more so directly than any other character. It's Hamlet himself. And the issue with identity kind of goes about in this sense. Well, the king and queen are kind of speculating about Hamlet's status, mental status. So they sent out two former childhood friends of Hamlet by the names of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And they say the king kind of call them over and they say, look, we're not quite sure about Hamlet, about his healthy state of being. Can you keep an eye on him for me? So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern agree. And when they go talk to Hamlet, right, they're acting like good friends, quote unquote. Hamlet can kind of see through. I mean, Hamlet's just a clever, clever guy. He sees through them. So he decides to act. He says, okay, these spies, I'm going to give them what they came for. I'm going to, play the part, so to speak. Right. Now, remember, at this point, Hamlet's desiring to know the truth of his father's murder. And so he's inquiring. He's trying to get to the source of how to discover this truth, right? So by meddling with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, maybe he can blow some smoke their way, and he can maybe try to get certain particular truth conceptions, right? Well, another aspect of this piece of identity is, or this conception of identity is, the king and queen are having a play, and so they have these characters, these actors coming in. They're going to act, right? So Hamlet intervenes. He goes, he sees them and he says, "Look, when you do the play, I don't want you to do whatever play it is that you're going to do. I want you to do this other play. This play is called The Murder of Gonzago. And the goal of this play is to show the murdering of a king." Now, what Hamlet wants to do is Hamlet wants to observe the king, the queen as well, and he wants to see their reactions. He wants to see maybe a look of horror or a look of surprise or shock, and something, right? Something to frame and define these attributions of truth. And it's called The Murder of Gonzago. That's the name of the play, right? So I want you to be more detailed in this matter, right? Hamlet seems to tell himself, I want you to look at all these observations, well, in the process of doing that and of knowing and realizing that he is acting, right? That he's deceiving, probably a better word. He also observes the characters, and one of the characters who, it's the fall of Troy, it's King Priam. And King Priam is talking about his wife, he's kind of giving a note to his wife Hecuba, and Priam is, he's about to fall, so to speak, right? And he's in tears, and all this. So, anyways, Hamlet notices the actor acting Priam's part. He says, this actor, this mythical character of Hecuba, she doesn't exist. It's but a fairy tale. How is it possible for this character to act in the manner in which he acted? And how could he be so convincing, right? And there's a deception of theater, right? That we know it's a work of fiction, right? In a sense. Yet within itself, it's able to transform, right? It's able to influence and impact. So as we observe Hamlet, we're thinking, okay, he's a clever guy, and we're seemingly witnessing a brilliant kind of pseudo actor at play. But once this whole ordeal happens in the whole play, and Hamlet comes to a point of frustration, Hamlet launches out to find Claudius, or to get to Claudius and murder him. He says, I'm after you. I know what you did, so to speak. So Hamlet kind of loses it. Maybe not. Let's say that he seemingly hasn't lost it mentally, but he goes on this like passionate, unhesitating desire to kill Claudius. Well, in the process, as he goes out and he looks for Claudius, he winds up in his mother's room, in his mother's room, and when he's there and he's talking to her, and he's now expressing himself openly. Says, do you not love my father? Or in a sense inferring, well, how could you get married so quickly to this guy, to Claudius, so to speak? When he said they're having the conversation, and Polonius, who's hiding behind the curtains, Hamlet notices the curtains move, and he just launches at them, and he stabs Polonius and kills him. Right. Well, at this point, you're wondering if Hamlet's, some speculation comes about Hamlet's sanity. Right. After all, if Hamlet is rational and is a good soul, so to speak, why is he losing himself so promptly? I mean, why is he losing himself so considerably? Well, another scene in this issue of Identity is, here's Hamlet. He's set to kill Claudius, and he can. There's a scene where he can kill him, and Claudius is praying, it's like at an altar, and he's playing, and Hamlet decides not to kill him because the scene is actually before he walks into Gertrude's room. He can kill him, but he decides not to because he says, when the soul leaves, right? I desire not to kill him, because if I did, then his soul's going to wind up going to heaven, right? So, um, so that puts an alarm on Claudia, on Hamlet, right? Maybe I should kill him. So he's being rational, right? He's being rational, but he nevertheless is on to murder Claudius. He's already murdered. He's murdered Polonius. So, anyways, they set about to seek justice for Polonius's death, and he's they sent him away, right? They sent him, tell him you're to be alienated here from Denmark. So he sets out to go to England, and as he sets away, the play in which Hamlet is regarding his actions a certain way, you're wondering about the sanity of his status, right? Eventually, he does kill Claudius, right? He does kill Claudius, and amidst the belief that the ghost is telling him the truth. But again, you have to question about whether his identity, what is Hamlet's identity? After all, Hamlet undertakes these different. He's like this brilliant actor, right? So in Hamlet playing these different scenarios, and you can see the diversity of his monologues as well. It makes it difficult to assert a truth with regards to Hamlet's identity. Maybe you could say the same of Ophelia too, a little bit, right? This woman who's madly in love with it, sets that aside and becomes the model daughter, and in a sense loses this connection with Hamlet, so to speak. With regards to the soliloquies of Hamlet, there's that dialectical, soliloquy that he has, in which Hamlet, asks the most famous series of lines in all of, drama, is the to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles. And so Hamlet's considering suicide. Do I undertake this dreadful responsibility, or life is just too tough in this sense, or not, or do I seek out in this goal of murderous vengeance, right? Which identity will he undertake, right? So this is interesting, right? What is the truth of Hamlet's? Is he acting all the way through? Is he sincere? Has he lost his mind? What's the issue? What is of it, right? The last of the truth conceptions, there certainly may be others, but it's a conception of death, and this comes about when there's they're observing the gravediggers. Hamlet's out at a graveyard, observing the gravediggers, and the gravediggers are kind of just very freely digging these holes, and we're relatively merry in the process, to the point where Hamlet's kind of questioning their integrity and respect for the dead, for which the gravediggers kind of say, well, look, the dead don't mind, they're dead. And anyways, in the process, there's a skull there, and Hamlet kind of just randomly asks, whose skull is that? And the gravedigger kind of uninterestingly said, "Oh, used to belong to a fellow named, or belongs to a fellow named Yorick." Well, when he says Yorick, it changes Hamlet's demeanor, and Hamlet relates how this character Yorick was the court jester, and as a court jester, how he used to play with him, and how he in a way raised him, and how he gives all these reverential, very great deal of reverence towards Yorick, and painting him as this great man, so to speak. He's made him very happy, and it was a very good experience in the process. Well, Hamlet, um, he starts questioning about death. What is death? Of course, we don't know until it occurs to us. And if when we die, if we're, nothing, if we don't have a sense of soul, then even in death, we won't have an answer to that question. Um, so, um, so he starts bringing about these examples, and he says, "Oh, look, here's Yorick, right? Yet Yorick's going to lie in the ground very much in the same way that Caesar lies in the ground, or Anthony lies in the ground." Uh, um, and he says, "Is even in our greatness," right? It relates to these emperors. Even in this greatness, does is death the great equalizer, right? Or does it matter how we abound such greatness if in the end it's all in vain to a certain extent? What is death, right? What is the purpose of living if to amount to death? Or does death indeed define a purpose to life? Um, so it's really interesting, right? It's really, really solemn, really almost nostalgic account of Yorick, and how his conception of him is bringing about these um, considerations of death. I mean, it's really, really interesting. Right? Well, I hope this has helped you. I hope this is giving you a good overview of how the work itself is forming these truths, right? Or at least forming these considerations of possible truths. We may not necessarily get answers to some of these truth conceptions, questions about with regards to these truth conceptions. Uh, but at least I hope it grounds you in understanding one of the beautiful. I mean, there's many beautiful aspects of Hamlet, but one of the beautiful aspects of Hamlet, and that at least in this account, it surfaces these almost like philosophical, almost like this little journey into epistemic journey towards discovering truth conceptions of the nature of being, love, identity, and death. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I thank you for listening. Thank you.